Thursday. Hello. This is going to be a bit of a confusing old presentation. I'll try and explain best I can, but if you're not confused at the end of it, you've got the brain the size of a planet. Right, let's start off with something nice and easy. GDP per capita in countries around the world and how well they've done since the recession of 2007. China, we can see, have done jolly well. Per capita, GDP up 35%, quite enormous. Then India, Argentina, Indonesia, Poland, Taiwan, Brazil, South Korea and Turkey, all these emerging nations have done quite well. Russia and Australia are there selling their commodities. Germany exporting, South Africa commodities and cheap labour, Switzerland probably the strong Swiss franc, and Sweden at the bottom. Sweden is an interesting country. No time to go into it. It used to be one type of country, now it's a bit different. And that bit different that they're doing works for a while. Right, let's go to the negative one. Sweden at the top, the last of the positives, takes us into the negatives of Belgium, Mexico, Canada and the Netherlands. Negative since the recession, GDP per capita. France, Portugal, United States in the middle there. The really bad ones, Spain, Japan, Britain, Italy, Greece and Ireland. No great shocks there. Ireland, naturally, Greece, Italy and Britain, with Japan in there as well. Let's move on. Let's move over to the United States of America and something that is kind of representative of the United States of America. It's time for a new kind of Bank of America solution, the right kind. This is Henry Blodgett at Business Insider. And he writes, Bank of America stock continues to tank despite management's assurances that the bank has enough capital. Enough capital? Yeah, enough capital. Now the stock has plunged below $7. Bank of America's stock is tanking because Bank of America's investors don't believe its assets are worth what Bank of America says they are worth. And this is the bottom line. This marked a fantasy that the banks were allowed to do to paper over the cracks of the crisis is just being extended and extended. And nobody knows what anything's worth. And it's banking, it's money, and it's all to do with credibility, and nobody's got any because nobody knows what's what. Blodgett goes on, we're so angry at Bank of America, Treasury Secretary Ken Geithner, and other folks that are responsible for the Bank of America debacle right now that we can hardly see straight. So this plan may take the form of a rant, but so be it, and goes on to talk about all sorts of ways of sorting out the Bank of America problem. And I don't know if you saw my tweet yesterday linking to Eve Smith, a Naked Capitalism blog post doing similar. It's just a huge problem. Banking needs credibility, and there is none. Louise Armistead, now talking about Euroland. We've gone back across the pond. Mr. Katainen said that if Finland's bilateral agreement with Greece over collateral payments was overruled, the Nordic country would back out of the rescue programme. Bit of an explanation, some of you'll know, but the second Greek bailout, Finland said, we'll sign up for it as long as you give us some collateral. Greece said okay and signed up for the collateral. Subsequently, other countries have come on and said, hey, we want some of that as well. France and Germany played parents and said, oh, shut up you lot, and Finland, you're naughty for asking for collateral. This is very bad. We're meant to be all the same here. Anyway, the contract was signed. He told reporters that the private collateral agreement in which Greece agreed to give Finland €1 billion in cash in return for its support was our Parliament's decision that we demand it as a condition for joining in. Fair enough. very democratic. That's what they said. That's what happened. But it is a problem, and I'll come back to it. But Louise pops in this: stock markets around the world climbed on Tuesday as positive economic data in China and America convinced traders that recent fears have been overblown. And there was good manufacturing news out of China, but I'm not quite sure what the good news was out of America. But they've certainly found good news. The stock market went well on Tuesday. Right. Moving on to the Financial Times, Alphaville, and the Greek collateral grab. That's the Finnish collateral thing that we've just talked about. A credit event after all. Now, people, ones of you that are really technically minded might want to go into this, because at the back of these credit default swaps, which is insurance on something going wrong, great wedges of small print, in there is something about taking collateral. And if collateral is taken, that means it is a full default, not a mere default that the Europeans have tried to make it. And because of the collateral taken, it could trip a credit event. Yeah, that's horribly tricky, but the lawyers are sorting that one out. But it's a big thing that Finland has done by asking for this collateral. Now, next one is German minister: Eurozone bailouts need collateral. Is after all this. So presumably the German minister knows about it could trip credit event on the CDSs, and what a fuss it's caused. But also picked up on the fact that other countries said, yeah, we want some of this collateral stuff as well, but must also know. Well, let's read it. German Labour Minister Ursula von der Leyen, who is also deputy president of Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, said on Tuesday that future Eurozone bailout payments should be covered by collateral such as gold reserves or stakes in state industry. In other words, she's saying, representing Angela Merkel presumably, surely she wouldn't say it without Angela's nod, that future bailouts, and what is a future bailout, should have collateral. They should be collateralized, which to my way of thinking, when you read that bottom thing, should be collateralized with things such as gold reserves or stakes in state industry. You can't do that, can you? To my mind, that's taking future bailouts off the table, because how can you do that possibly? I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? An island here or the gold reserves is fair enough, because then that can be divvied up quite equally. But stakes in state industry, how do you divvy that up as collateral among the countries that are bailing out? Very, very difficult. What I'm saying here is, it looks like Germany is now backing out of all bailouts. That's the way I read this. And it's as though Germany and France were looking after the children, telling them off, and just said to the ECB, well, you look after the children just for 5 minutes. We're sick of it. We're going outside for a cigarette. And the ECB, who hates children, goes, yeah, don't know what to do. But is there in charge of the children. And the adults have gone out for a cigarette, and then they've just wandered down to the road and seen some friends going past and decided to go down to the pub with the friends, and now they've gone on to a club and they might never come back. And the ECB is there in charge of the children. And it's perfectly natural by the politicians, knowing that it's so difficult and there's nothing really that can be done, so they're out of there. And the ECB's, what's the ECB meant to do? It's got the choice of saying 9 and shutting up shop, or just keeping the funny money going. Funny money all round. Which is sweeties for the children, which doesn't do them any good in the long run. Right. This is Ambrose Evans Pritchard from an article I linked to yesterday. So with fiscal policy exhausted, keeping up fiscal policy, that's government policy, exhausted. He says, so with fiscal policy exhausted, because everyone wants to do this austerity stuff, the burden must fall on monetary policy. Monetary policy, money, banks, central bank. Monetary policy is central bank stuff. Here we have barely begun to use our atomic arsenal, even at zero rates, as Milton Friedman taught us, though nobody in Frankfurt, that's the Bundesbank that's meant to be looking after the ECB, it's a fallacy to think that low rates are loose, very low interest rates, loose belt on the floor. Zero can be extremely tight. He doesn't explain it there, nor am I going to explain it. That may be the case now as US Treasury yields are signalling deflation and M2 velocity is collapsing as it did pre-Lehman. I haven't checked the M2 velocity, but M2 actual number is going bottom left, top right. But I don't know how you do check the velocity. To those who argue that the Fed is pushing on the proverbial string, David Beckworth from University of Texas replies that the Fed showed that between 1933 and 36, we're obviously talking Depression time, it could deliver blistering growth of 8% a year despite debt deleveraging in the rest of the economy. And that's what we've got now, is obviously debt deleveraging. And is the Fed pushing on a string? So let's check. This is David Beckworth in a kind of a reply to Ambrose Evans Pritchard, quoting himself. The balance sheet recession view cannot easily reconcile the large deleveraging by households and the rapid economic growth that occurred between 1933 and 36. So we are comparing now to the Great Depression. What can explain it is a more nuanced view that acknowledges creditors with excess money demand were confronted by FDR's original quantitative easing program. Okay, back in 36, earlier. This quantitative easing program was far better than the recent ones in that FDR, back in the day, clearly signalled a price level target and backed it up by devaluing the gold content of the dollar and allowing unsterilized gold inflows. In other words, FDR signalled that he was going to allow a significant and permanent increase in the monetary base and followed through on it. This changed nominal expectations and caused creditors to start spending their money balances. A credible flooding of the monetary base, and the people with the money. What we've got at the moment is 95% of the population owe 5% of the population. We've got 95% debtors, 5% creditors. That told the creditors, whoa, kids, better get that money spent and get it back to the debtors and get it circulating again. It can be done, but it is quite nuclear. Right, this is another thing on that. It's tricky, but this is what the world is dealing with now. While Bernanke will want to show that the Fed still has options at its disposal with various trade-offs associated, perhaps he may want also to underscore the limitations of monetary policy. In other words, Bernanke might want to say central bank policy running out of ammo. With nominal and real interest rates extremely low, banks with ample wherewithal to lend and easing loan conditions, maybe at this juncture there is not much more that monetary policy could do. This chap, follow the link, says that central banks are running out of ammo. If current conditions are somewhat like the Great Depression, then we may need to face up to the fact that it ultimately was not monetary policy that ended the crisis, but fiscal policy. A couple of weeks ago, the Spanish finance minister, Elena Salgado, was quoted saying that it was more important for Spain to reach its austerity targets than revive growth. I thought she was a bright bunny. That's a moronic thing to say. This seems, well, foreign to many Americans. It's not that growth is a panacea, but it does seem to make problems easier to deal with. Bloody right, this is what I keep pushing. You need growth, 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 or those debts are not going to be paid. What he goes on to talk about is it's fiscal only that really is going to shift this, and talks about the WPA that we piss about, which FDR had millions of Americans working. Out of America and onto Japan, but it's all linked. Japan's Noda asks for 10% budget spending cut. Japan's finance minister, whatever his name is. Funny that you can't read that. It's not tricky. Yoshiko Noda told his cabinet colleagues on Tuesday to cut spending by 10% in the next financial year, starting April the 1st, 2012, from current levels. According to Kyodo News Report, the reduction is aimed at securing funds and help cover the nation's burgeoning welfare costs and reflect the policy priority of the new Prime Minister. Probably have a new Prime Minister next week. So the reduction is aimed at securing funds, cutting the budget by 10%. Presumably this is to give confidence to the bond market to give them bonds. I don't understand it. They don't seem to have struggling with bonds. And let's finish with the Financial Times. Alphaville this morning. Moody's lowers Japan's rating to AA3. You can read the full statement if you like. So I'm not sure that Japan has made a brilliant decision there. Well, or have Moody's not made a brilliant decision? Are you confused? Hopefully you're confused enough to know that anybody that says they're not confused about how to get out of this crisis is probably full of shit. Bye.